This is Paul Braren from Tinkertry talking to Bruce Becker. We both live in Connecticut. We both have Model 3s. Bruce got his Model 3 first in all of Connecticut, but he's also an architect and he's doing stuff with energy that I think is quite creative on these buildings you'll see behind. Today I'm in Hartford, Connecticut at 777 Main, that building up there, and there's a few unique things about this location. Yes, this is a Tesla Supercharger, and there's my car getting a 72 kilowatt charge right now. But hang on, there's a lot more I want to show you. And this building was retrofitted with a fuel cell. And this is a South Windsor, Connecticut company. And Bruce Becker, the guy responsible, the architect for this project, is actually the first Tesla Model 3 owner in the state of Connecticut. In case you weren't aware of this very special Tesla Supercharger facility. I kind of doubt it's a coincidence that Tesla has superchargers here. Just notice a nice touch here in the satellite map. We're looking at the top of 77 Main where I'm parked, and you'll see solar panels. Why, of course. So we can zoom in even further. There we go. And the Tesla Supercharger that I'm parked at. Perfectly accurately showing an arrow in the spot that I'm actually at. We've never had a chance to talk one-on-one. We've met each other at a Model 3 Tesla event where the police cruiser was shown in Westport, Connecticut, and that was a year ago now. So for me, it's quite an honor to have a chance to one-on-one catch up with you, and maybe you can help me answer some of the questions I have about your amazing work. Bruce, before we get into those, if you could introduce yourself a little bit and what you do in architecture and kind of your path to the EV Club of Connecticut, if you can cover that as well.
Sure. And I want to make one correction. Even though I did have the first Model 3 Tesla in Connecticut, I've, I pride myself on trying out all the latest and greatest products in the world of sustainability. And I no longer have that Model 3. And I'll go back a step before giving a general introduction. I'll give you my pedigree of electric vehicles.
Great. Thank you.
I started out, my first electric vehicle was the BMW Active E, which was a car that they made in 2011. It was basically a 1 Series BMW where they modified it and they put a battery pack in, 100 kilowatt hour battery pack, and a rear drive electric motor. And I think I leased it for $400 a month for 2 years, and they diagnosed and learned from that before launching the i3. Then I got the i3, which with the range extender, which was a fantastic vehicle, and really enjoyed that. But I did have a house up in Vermont during that time, and the range wasn't quite enough, even with the extender, to work. So I finally made the leap to the Model S, I think in 2015.
Pretty early. Okay.
Yeah, so it was an early one. Although actually, since I've always bought the full self-driving ones, although I've yet to fully realize that. That one I had for a couple of years. Then I bought the Model 3. So we had 2 Teslas at one point. And my wife, meanwhile, was driving the Class B Mercedes, which was a great vehicle that she leased for only a few $100s a month. And that was a great vehicle. It had a range of only about 90 miles, but was really a fantastic car and a good value. And then she recently got the Model Y, and I traded the old 3 and the old S for a newer S. So now I'm driving I guess it's a 2019 S. So I've enjoyed having a chance to try out all those vehicles. They keep getting better and better, and that passion for electric vehicles and my involvement with the Electric Vehicle Club has sort of paralleled my professional interest and work as an architect and developer of sustainable buildings. My firm is Becker and Becker Associates. We're based here in Westport and have sort of a unique practice. It's a combination architecture and development practice. We do some projects for clients, but most of the work we do is where we're our own client. We sort of invent the project, figure out how to finance it and build it, and that gives us the flexibility to go a little further on the spectrum of sustainability than any client might be expected to go. So we basically combine those disciplines so that we can, um, go further than the norm in terms of sustainability initiatives.
So I have a question for you here, and let me hang on a second here. There we go. Questions about going into your thought process of 2014, 2015, starting to think about an electric car. How many miles a year were you driving for personal use and for business at that point in your life?
Um, I think the most I would ever drive in a given year would be 20 20,000 maybe,
Oh,
somewhere between 15 and 20. A
okay.
fair amount of driving. I mean, particularly I was doing a big project in Hartford, the 777, and often I would go there multiple times a week, uh, go into New York a little bit. I had kids until recently, one son who was up in Providence and another up in New London. So I'm, even though my office is only a mile and a half away from my house,
Hmm.
I'm on the road a fair amount. And I love driving the electric car, particularly with the auto steer feature. It's it it's I would I can work as effectively in the car as almost anywhere. In fact, I've often parked and done Zoom calls from my car because it's perfect climate controlled environment. It's I don't get interrupted by anything around me, so
Yeah.
I'm very much at home in the car.
I'm nodding my head because I even have a profile, a seat position setting for Paul's mobile office. I touch the button, the seat goes back. I get my laptop out. I'm parked, like you said, perfectly climate controlled. Maybe I'm at a rest stop in Charlton, Mass, on the way back in the Miss Pike from Boston, or whatever. You can be incredibly effective for that 1 hour phone call that I'm leading. If I know the Verizon signal's strong in that rest stop, I'm good to go for an hour, just like you said. So, but I'll also ask you too. So 2015, what was the range in that Model S that you got? And you obviously we're not going to want to be supercharging when you're running a little late for a meeting in Hartford at 9 a.m. and you're driving in traffic.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell me about that a
Well,
little bit.
yeah. Well, even the first Model S, I never had to charge going to Hartford and back, and
Yeah.
I guess that's about a 70-mile each way. So typically 140 miles of range. On a super cold day, you go through 200, but that car, the had, I thought it was like 280 or something, or at least 250. So
Yep.
that was that was always more than sufficient, which was a big contrast to all the cars I've had up to that point. I had the experience. I was meeting a friend up at Foxwoods once, and I saw that there was a level two charger there,
Hmm.
and I calculated that I could make it there no problem. But then uh, I ended up seeing him on the road, and he started racing a little bit. So I instead of going 65, I was going 75, and I ended up a mile short and had to get towed. Uh, yeah,
Oh,
so
you.
that sort of struck home the need. First of all, the BMW did not have what Tesla has, which is there's always like an extra 10 or 15 miles in reserve with the Tesla. So I've actually never heard of anyone who's run out of juice with the Tesla before, but it did happen with my BMWs on a couple occasions.
Oh, I love that
Uh,
story. Um, I mean, I've gone 40,000 miles myself. A lot of it was business meetings. In 2019, I drove 20,000 miles that year, and a good chunk of that was DC all the way to Maine, all over the place for business meetings. And yeah, you can't be late. You can't have supercharging be a big deal, and that's what a lot of people ask me. But the part they're missing is, you're charging at home most of the time. For those long road trips, though, I did a significant number of hotel stays where, um, yeah, I mean, I'd be driving to DC or Delaware whenever, and it'd be handy if the hotel could just charge overnight, so I didn't have to think about it at all. No, no stop, just park and get up next morning and all ready to drive around for work. So
did you
yeah, I've
find
actually
that
supercharged 70 times, so significant.
did you find that you had no problem finding hotels with chargers?
DC was actually a little tough because I'd be arriving at midnight. So you'd go there and the garages are closed. So I had to shop a little bit carefully. But now they've built like 3 superchargers in that area since. So I could have just done a 10-minute charge when I arrived and been all good to go for the next day, right? Not a big deal
But
anymore. It's gotten better.
an increasing number of hotels do have level two chargers
Yeah.
on site, but you have to look.
Yeah, yeah. So if you have 3 people you're meeting for breakfast and you're driving at 9 a.m., the car's got to be ready. You're not going to hang out a supercharger with them. That's the point. There could be a little stress in that to make darn sure the hotel's ready for you. But there's actually hotel finders for cars or places with level 2 as well. So to this video, so we're kind of talking to maybe introductory people who are not so familiar with Tesla, but it's all related with charging, right? So we've got several types of chargers. We have, was it 72 kilowatts? We got 150, and then we got 250. So let me explain. The first ones, and Bruce will talk about that in a moment here, a building that you're very much aware of. Here we've got 77 Main in Hartford, and here we've got a supercharger right next to it with my car there. And let me just show that picture a little bigger for anyone watching the YouTube here. What's special about this picture is, well, there's the high-rise building next to it. What's special is the fuel cell. And now you're an architect. You'd be pretty aware of all that goes into getting this fuel cell going here. And I think there's some Connecticut-based company technology over on this side here. And then also this garage behind my car. You've also got level 2 chargers for people working in that area in Hartford. And then these are called Urban chargers. These are the 72 kilowatt, earlier generation, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. So yeah, if you could tell the story a little bit about how 777 project in Hartford, a major skyscraper, if you will, pretty prominent in our skyline in our city, how that came to be, where you transformed it from, I think, Bank of America before you to very nice places to live for all sorts of folks. Yeah, if you could tell us that story.
Yeah, so I had just finished developing a project in downtown New Haven called 360 State Street, and I was looking around for another venture that could go even deeper into sustainability, and went up to Hartford and was surprised to find the biggest building on the skyline was vacant. That the banks had moved out, and the entire tower, this 26-story tower, the lights were off, and it was a horrible symbol for the state and for the city. And yet there was a growing demand, which I had seen down in New Haven, for urban housing. So I spent about a year and a half negotiating with the owner of the property to buy it. But I also had to work with the city and the CRDA, the Capital Region Development Authority, to put together the financing to make the numbers work. But we've redeveloped that vacant office building into the largest apartment building in Hartford. It's a LEED Platinum project. It has 285 apartments, as well as ground floor retail. We have a CVS in the old banking hall, Blue State Coffee. It has a parking garage for 250 cars, and also additional retail over there with a little market, Subway shop, a eyeglass retailer, and a great camera store too. So it's a whole mixed-use project, and our goal was to sort of reinvent the building from an energy perspective. We put in a water source heat pump system for really efficient heating and cooling. We put a 400 kilowatt fuel cell on the site to power the building. It provides like 90% of the energy for the building, including we harvest the waste heat from that for the domestic hot water. And then we also put 120 kilowatt solar array on the top of the building. So it's power with renewable energy. We also have the first level 3 DC fast charger in the state was put there. It's on the second floor of the garage. We had until recently an additional 10 charge point level 2s in the garage. I've recently donated several of those to Connecticut College because we put some level 2 destination chargers on the top deck. That one thing we learned is that when we had these chargers on the second floor, they were some of the first spaces you get to, and they were always getting parked in. They were getting iced. And I quickly learned that you should always put the EV charger in the furthest spot, not the closest spot. There's a tendency to put them closest to the door. And as an EV driver myself, I'm always so thrilled to have a place to plug in. I'd gladly walk to the furthest space. And also, particularly if that mitigates the possibility of the space being unavailable because it's being parked in.
Yeah, I have a quick interjection there. Yeah, we just have a new charger, a level 2 charger here at an apartment complex in Wethersfield, Connecticut. Within a month, that exact problem. And the spots next to it are Handicap, clearly marked handicap. So the extension cords run two or even three adjoining spots, but all six of those spots are filled, and then the other half in the other direction is handicap. It's iced all the time. So this is a real challenge. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, it's not a challenge if you could always put them in the most remote spaces. If you do
yeah,
that, put them in the spaces that the people are least likely to park into, then they'll be available. And if they and then if it is really is the last spot in the building, maybe it's uh, and the EV chargers aren't getting a lot of use. We do have we put in when we put the superchargers in. We had some of the first urban superchargers in the Northeast that
mm,
we put in. They're slightly smaller, as you mentioned. They're a lower capacity, but surprisingly, you can charge like up to 400 miles an hour on them. I don't quite understand it, but they can charge. They still charge almost as fast as the more powerful ones. It's a very compact design, and we were fortunate to partner with Tesla. They came in and put the infrastructure in, and they donated. We gave them the space for the six superchargers, but then they also, on their own, they helped us put in level two destination chargers. I believe we have eight destination Tesla chargers on the roof, as well as eight Clipper Creeks. And so that solved the problem of uh, of the icing of those charging spaces because they're on the top deck. It's the one place that doesn't have covered parking, so um, it's the most remote and the least desirable, except for EV owners. And so people who live in the building and who work in the area, they can park for free. It is a commercial parking garage, so you have to have a monthly pass or pay as a transient to get in. But once you're in there, there's no additional charge for the level two charging.
Bruce, I'm going to circle back to like the fuel cell part and the heat pump. I'm going to get into that a little bit, but before I do, I'll mention also another story. Thank you for correcting me on overblowing the issue with level two destination chargers. It's not that big a deal. It's just the landlord decided to put them where they did. And you're right, they're near the front door. So of course, regular cars and people paying good money for those apartments, they just park. They don't, and they do have another set in the back. So there's a plan B, and that is if you're iced in the front, you can go around back. So I don't want to make too much of that. But if you're traveling with family and you're trying to, eat at a Panera Bread for an hour, you do kind of want to know before you get off the exit, is there some likelihood that you'll actually get it? And that is a challenge in the third-party charging world. So most of our focus, you and I are talking about Teslas in particular, but you've got 8 Clipper Creeks up there. Was there a code, an ordinance, a rule for you to say, okay, if you're going to put 10 Tesla proprietary connectors in your facility that you were the architect and building, do you also have to put 8 Clipper Creeks, J1772? Can you tell us how that worked?
Yeah, I just asked Tesla, and they actually, I think they may even have volunteered it. Of course, Tesla's mission is to advance adoption of sustainable
Yep.
energy, and to their credit, they seem to be just as happy if someone buys a non-Tesla electric car, it
Mm.
fulfills the and I think they're cognizant of the fact that if they're making this big investment, that they don't want it to be exclusive. And I think their new destination chargers uh, come with adapters, I guess, or additional plugs so that you can charge any car with them. So
Yep.
they're that was easily negotiated and with Tesla to put them in, and they did it at their cost as one of the ways to compensate us for the spaces that we have made available to them.
Okay, so yeah, my following question where I was talking about the wiring, like you mentioned, these are some of the first, or maybe the first in Connecticut, I don't know, of urban superchargers. Maybe in the Northeast region there weren't a lot. So this is what year are we talking? Like 2014,
Uh,
2013?
no, it's later than that. I think it might have been 2016 or
Oh, it's
17.
pretty okay, wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
we opened the building without them. Our we When we opened the building, we didn't have any. Then we put in the charge points, both the level twos and the level three, the one level
and those
three
are up in the garage here, above the superchargers there. Yep.
Originally, they were down where the Tesla Superchargers are. Then we moved them up.
Okay.
Tesla would only come in if they were not behind a gate. So, which made sense because they want they're charging so rapidly, you don't want to encumber them with that. So, and we also thought that a level 2 charger, they're more likely to be used by people that were working for the day and they weren't in such a rush, so they could park in the garage. What I did learn is that the monthly data services with ChargePoint, as well as the monthly maintenance fee, was more than I was collecting in revenue. And so
I've heard of that problem. So now I'm hearing it firsthand from you. This is great. Dive into that a little bit. So there's a burden, their potential burden for the landlord.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something like $30 a month per charging head. It's and then there was like another $20 for the warranty. So let's say it was $50 a month per head. That's $600 per charging head. And if you're only my theory was, let's put a bunch more in than are actually going to be used and people will grow into it. But the mistake I made, maybe if I only had one, it would have made sense, but I put in 5 doubles. So I had 10 charging heads and, $6,000 a year in just carrying costs. And I was collecting, a few $100s a year I also I wanted to just recover my direct costs for the electricity. So I figured far better to just give it away for free. And eventually, if we have 500 people living in the building, eventually if we have 30 of them up on that upper parking deck charging in every night, then maybe I could put in some kind of revenue collection. But so there are 2 lessons learned. One is put the chargers in the most remote space. 2, don't pay a premium for revenue collection if you're not going to end up collecting enough revenue to pay for that system. Now, the good news is that the state of Connecticut, through PURA, the Public Utility Regulatory Authority, they've just announced a plan, it's in draft form, where they will pay for they'll require the utility companies to pay for the what they call make ready, basically the wiring and the service for EV chargers, and then somewhere between half and 100% of the cost of the chargers, and maybe even the data services for that. So we'll see how that plays out. But it may be that the utility system will bear the brunt of those costs, which they've actually determined saves all ratepayers money, because the more people who are charging their electric cars at night, the more electricity they're selling, and they're spreading the fixed costs over, for every kilowatt hour over a lot more people. So even if they have to give the charger away and pay for that at the end of the day, it saves the system in terms of reducing the per kilowatt hour costs.
So Bruce, so far we've kind of done almost a 101 of a bit of charging. Someone watching the video to this point, it's been mostly Tesla, but not all cars. Like you said, J1772, that's standard you used on your BMW and so forth. And like you also pointed out, a Tesla comes with that, right? In the glove box generally, or in the trunk, you'll find this adapter we can plug in at these places. And it's really handy if you're working there or eating there or whatever. Eating not so much, because you're not going to get that much charge out of an hour, but parking overnight or working there all day, that's significant. Now you have a younger buyer that can, if they have charging for free at work, maybe they live in an apartment at night, but their problem is solved. That's a pretty big deal, right? And must be part of your thought process when you're thinking about these charging spots near these buildings where people work and live.
Absolutely. They're, charging is, in reality, it's one of the easier things about an EV, but in terms of someone making the switch for the first time, it's something that they worry about.
Yeah.
Right now, I think we have 5 or 6 residents that have Teslas or other electric vehicles in the building. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that there hasn't been more rapid adoption it was sort of my strategy to try to induce more people. I figured, it's an amenity for our building, and hopefully will allow us to lease apartments a little bit faster by saying, we have these electric car chargers. But particularly if you're a commuter and you can live at a place where you get free electricity, I would think that that would be something you'd factor into your choice of vehicle and your choice of apartment.
Absolutely.
But it may be that people in Connecticut have too many things to think about. They're not always as analytic. But the reality is that car ownership is like the second biggest cost for most people, other than their housing. And there are, if you do live in an apartment and you have an electric car and free charging, that gives you sort of more disposable income to devote to other things. And there was one other aspect of putting the chargers in I want to mention, which is I wanted the retailers in our building to be successful. Connecticut cities have always struggled a little bit with their retail locations, because, and not so much in New Haven, but in Hartford, there's sort of a 9 to 5 culture there with the banks and insurance companies and law firms that people who don't live in the city just leave at 5 o'clock. And I wanted to use the Tesla Superchargers as a way to get people off the highway into Hartford to see all the great restaurants and retail amenities that are there. And also for the folks that are right around the chargers that are my tenants, we have this Greenway Market, which is a great sort of mini Whole Foods where you can get, sandwiches and produce and organic food. And it gives them a steady stream of new clients and business. We have the CVS is there, which is, despite COVID, they've kept the doors open and people coming through can run over to the grocery store or to the pharmacy. There's also a little Indian food place that's great that has takeout. There's a Subway sandwich shop. And so rather than putting DC and fast chargers out in the highway where, people aren't going to add to the economic activity of the state, if you put them in a convenient location where they're just a couple blocks off the highway, it can actually be, fast charging can be a positive force in economic development for Connecticut cities. And so that's something that motivated me. And I think my tenants are really happy about that because they do get unexpected traffic at all hours.
Bruce, I'm so glad you brought that up too. And I was thinking about that as you're parked here, there's so much food and restaurants right in that area. So all good points, right? That's a unique supercharger that people, it's important. It wasn't chosen by chance is what your point here is. Very deliberate. And it's an important message. Let's go more like into the 201 now. So you're LEED certified. If you could define what that is, my brother's an architect, but just define for someone watching this, what does that mean and what did you go through? And how long ago did you make that turn in your career to go efficient?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually a LEED accredited professional, LEED AP. The projects are the ones that get certified, and they can be certified at different levels depending on how far you go with your sustainability strategies. And you can have a basic LEED certification. You could be LEED Silver, LEED Gold, or LEED Platinum. Platinum being the highest measure. And it's a process of collecting points in different categories, for energy efficiency, for using locally in recycled materials, for building practices that improve indoor air quality, non-off-gassing materials. There's for using sites in a way that's sustainable, having things like bike racks and showers available. There's like 100 different measures that you get scored on. And depending on how deep you go in the design to achieve these sustainability objectives, you can collect points and you get to a certain point at each level. And so we've achieved the LEED Platinum status for 2 projects. We were LEED Silver for a project in Manhattan on Roosevelt Island that we did called the Octagon. That's a 500 unit apartment building with a child care center and a convenience shop and a tennis courts and a waterfront park. But we've sort of used the score sheet as a way to make sure that we aren't overlooking measures, and it's actually been helpful. We've learned along the way how to go deeper to improve the environmental footprint of buildings, so that we approach carbon neutrality. The most recent project we're doing, and I should say the project at 360 State Street is LEED Platinum. The 777 Main Street in Hartford is LEED Platinum. And the current project that I'm working on, which is going to be a hotel, a redevelopment of the Pirelli building in New Haven, will be LEED Platinum. But also, we're seeking Passive House certification for it, which is another measure which creates a very high standard for the building envelope so that it actually needs very little heating and cooling. And by putting enough renewable energy on the building, it will be net zero. We're going to have solar canopies to provide covered parking, as well as solar on the roof. And we're going through this process of actually eliminating all fossil fuels. We won't even have natural gas for our kitchen or our laundry, which is really unprecedented. We'll have an all-electric kitchen, all-electric laundry, and we're going to generate all that electricity on site using renewable energy.
All right, so Bruce, this is where this is perfect. I want to tie this all together. So we kind of got the 101 of charging. I showed my garage charging back there. We talked about the different challenges in building in urban environments and benefits to putting chargers near where people live or sleep or eat. But you just started covering what happens on commercial projects where you can reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are used. So
Yeah.
I have questions about this. So for instance, I went to a supercharger opening because, well, I'm a nerd and drove all the way to Cape Cod and got to see a V3 supercharger. V3 is one of those new 250 kilowatts where that first 5 minutes might matter. If you're on a business trip and you're coming up a little short to make it to the thing you're going to, if you can park at the supercharger for 5 minutes, use the bathroom at the Stop and Shop next to it, and be on your way, you might get 70, 80 miles in the middle of summer. And that can make all the difference to making it back home on time for dinner with your family at 5 rather than stopping to supercharge. Those details, right? They do matter. But most of the time they don't. 99% of the rest of the year, it might be once or twice a year you run into a spot like that where the speed matters. So like you said, I think the bigger thing with the 150 kilowatt superchargers that are very common all over the Northeast, and we have a ton of them in Connecticut, kind of a pass-through state between Boston and New York. That can be a problem when you have an adjoining stall. So say you're parked, you thought you're going to be at Ruby Tuesday charging for 25 minutes, another car pulls in next to yours, and now it's going to take 45, 50 minutes to charge. Those things, that's kind of the nerdy bits. I'm not trying to dissuade someone from watching that's a big deal. Unless you're a business traveler who travels a ton every day for work, none of this matters. You're charging in your garage or your apartment overnight, and you just off you go. More convenient than gas. But there are some people like me that push the limit. I drove a lot for work, had to be at meetings at time, and I found it just an interesting experience. Is this a good deal? And I blogged a whole lot about it on my site. So, but I'm such a nerd that when the first V3 supercharger being built anywhere in the Northeast, when I say Northeast, I mean Tennessee on up. So there's one in Atlanta, one in Tennessee, almost none east of the Mississippi besides those two. And then Connecticut. They picked Connecticut for the first V3, and it was in Fairfield, along with Dunkin' Donuts in Meriden, Connecticut. It looked like Dunkin' Donuts got built first. I got to see them put the cabinets in. We talked a little bit about the data, which was AT&T Cellular, it sounds like. You could see everything they were doing, and it was pretty cool to just see the project go up. Because, I don't know, I just find it interesting what's actually under the covers in that equipment they're installing. And these are water-cooled hoses that now go to your car. Because Tesla's charger can get a little warm in the desert climates, especially where the charging will actually slow from heating that cable. But back to you and the questions about your site there. So 777 Main, and then we'll go back to talking about here in New Haven. 777 Main, you had decisions about whatever year it was, mid-20. What year was it that building had residents move in?
I think they moved in 2014.
Okay, so your goal there was to get less impact on the grid and fuel cells fit in how. And the reason I ask is, and I'll just phrase this, when I went to Cape Cod, what was truly unique about that Stop and Shop, they built a gorgeous pad with this giant fuel cell right next to the V3 superchargers, all in one pad. I'm like, well, that's different. And I got out the camera, walked around, took pictures. So it had me scratching my chin thinking, well, that reminds me when last summer we had 8 days of no power at my mom's house here in Weathersfield. Food ruined, of course. We brought it to my house and ran a generator. Not great, but that's what we got. And it was far cheaper than any other option with a manual transfer switch. I tell you that story because our Stop and Shops lost millions of dollars of inventory. They had no generator, right? So here at Cape Cod, they did it right. Maybe they know they have power outages in the summer. I don't know Cape Cod too well, but man, it was an impressive sight. A brand new looking supermarket, or a pretty new supermarket with a brand new Tesla supercharger with this fuel cell, which gave it a very, now it's using natural gas in that outage, which on Cape Cod, maybe they had a 50-year history that it's not a problem. If we look at Texas right now, right, good segue to what's happening in the news right now. What a disaster. They're throwing wind turbines under the bus, if you will, saying they're to blame, but it's only maybe 5% of their state's power, and they didn't buy the optional upgrade to keep it winter ready. In other words, they want to blame the wind farm, but it's actually a cost-cutting measure, right? It's a mess.
I think they never lost all the wind power. They lost some of it, probably a smaller proportion than they did of the natural gas infrastructure.
Yep.
But yeah, fuel cells are they, in some sense, they're a transitional technology. When you have a tall building, it's very hard. If it's 32 stories, like the 360 State Street is, which has a fuel cell too, or 777, which is 26 stories. You just don't have the roof area to have enough solar panels to generate all your power from renewables on site. So the fuel cell is a good way to increase the efficiency. It's a true combined heat and power technology, which means that when you're making the power, you're also able to harvest the waste heat and use that for the domestic hot water. For an apartment building, you have a year-round need for domestic hot water for the showers and whatnot. So we're able to get basically twice as much benefit from the same amount of natural gas as you would if you were just burning natural gas for a boiler, whether it's for to heat the building or heat the domestic hot water. The fuel cell is actually a hydrogen fuel cell, and it reforms natural gas into hydrogen before it is used by the fuel cell. And the only byproduct of that is CO2, which our long-term goal at 777 is to take the basement in that building and have a vertical farm. So we can actually grow things using the CO2 at double the rate. So that's something that I've been trying to find a partner to work with. But
oh, that's really cool. Didn't see that one coming. I hadn't thought of that. That's great.
Yeah, and that way you'll actually mitigate all of the carbon impact from natural gas, which normally isn't possible to do. The other thing is you could make the hydrogen with electrolysis from solar, and maybe someday there will be a hydrogen pipeline that could be where the hydrogen is made through a renewable method from solar or wind or something else, which is and this fuel cell that we have, would function even more effectively if it just was powered with hydrogen. But we're not quite there yet. But so that's the rationale. IKEA, which is next to our hotel down in New Haven, they have a Bloom fuel cell, which is a really cool model. Yeah, they're right next to us, and but they also have solar panels on their roof, and they're looking to be a net zero building as well. So they're if you're passionate about electric cars for environmental reasons, you want to avoid burning fossil fuels because you understand all of the horrible things that does for human health and the planet, you really should be equally passionate about not using fossil fuels for your home as well. And there's the exact same forces are at work and benefits are available if you get rid of your oil burner or your propane or natural gas furnace and convert to all electric heat pumps. It used to be that the only way you could have an all electric heating and cooling system was to go geothermal. And that took a big investment and some uncertainty with how many wells you'd have to drill and how much pumping energy would be required. And most of the people that I know who've embarked on geothermal end up using more energy and spending more money than they expected. And it's sort of very hard to factor. You actually have to go ahead and drill the well and test it to know what the result will be. The new breed of heating and cooling variable refrigerant flow heat pumps, otherwise known as VRFs, they take all the uncertainty out of what your return on investment will be, because as long as you know what climate you're in, you know how hard those heat pumps will work to cool or heat your house. They're also rated down to their rated capacity for heating at 20 degrees below zero, and they still work at even lower temperatures, but just slightly less efficiency. And they are the least cost mechanical system to install for a building now, and they're also the least cost to operate. So unlike electric cars, where the electric cars are still more expensive to buy, but they're less expensive to operate, the VRF heat pumps are actually the cheapest system you can buy. Why people aren't using them now, it's sort of the same as the car dealers. There's a network of companies out there they make their money selling things that are based on a fossil fuel economy, and so they don't want you to know about it. But I converted my house. I'm in my house in Westport. The part I'm in was built in 1916, and it had pine cones for insulation. But after we bought it, we did a full renovation of the envelope to foam it, and we put solar panels on the garage and on the main roof. And this is a net zero building too. I sort of experimented on this before taking that whole thinking and technology to the project in New Haven I'm working on.
Wow, Bruce, you touched upon a couple of things too. You mentioned the heat pump earlier at 777. What differs there versus how you're doing things now with this new construction in New Haven? There's about 6 or 7 years between those two projects.
Yeah, the system at 360 State Street and 77 is a water source heat pump. It uses these Climate Master heat pumps with a pipe loop. Rather than taking energy from the outdoor air, they take the energy out of a water loop that's in the building that we installed, and that water loop it draws in the winter, it draws excess waste heat from the fuel cell to sort of preheat it, and we also have some boilers which don't turn on very much at all, but they're there as a backup measure to precondition that water loop to heat it in the winter, so that then the heat pumps don't have to work as hard. They're just magnifying the heat from that loop to generate heat for the apartments in the winter. In the summer, there's a cooling tower. It's an electric cooling tower that helps expel the heat to cool the water in the loop and help the heat pumps in the apartments cool the space. So it's still a heat pump, and they're both sort of work the way a refrigerator does to just magnify the amount of heat for cooling. But for the VRFs, there's an outdoor unit, and it's basically a air-to-air system. There's a refrigerant that runs between the hotel room heat pump and the outdoor unit. But it's a similar concept, but slightly different technology, because the medium, you're going from air to water in one and from air to air in the other.
So a good segue also into Model Y. So you have a heat pump in your Model Y, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So
and it's that it's not a dramatic difference, because I've never really noticed a huge difference. In my first Model S, I did, when it was really cold, I did notice it. I'm not sure if the Model S I have now has the heat pump in it. I don't think it does, because I think it was only after the Model Y came out that they started making devices with the heat pump. But for some reason, the new Model S isn't quite as susceptible to cold weather in terms of its impact on the range. But the Y is very robust, and there's, um, the range really isn't impacted.
So Bruce, let's see, you get a lot of bloggers that got excited about the heat pump showing up in the Model Y and now the Model 3 as well for 2021 onward. They're showing up with those features. What we're talking about here is, my car might have, let's say, parked at Logan Airport for 3 days while I was in Florida. It was like 0 Fahrenheit when I left and like 12 Fahrenheit when I got back in the middle of February. That's about the worst case scenario. Car sitting there in a garage, not plugged in, and now you're driving home 3 days later. It's cold soaked, right? So you're going to lose 40% or something on that trip back to Hartford, 100 miles. Fine, that's just the way it is. That's just science and electricity and all the losses there. Because you're not preconditioning, you're not plugged into shore power to get the battery pack warm before I hit the road. No, I get off a plane, got in my ice cold car, and off I went. It's doable, but there's a considerable loss, and that meant supercharging that drive home. I couldn't make it straight to Connecticut because I'd driven already 100 miles to the airport, right? So this is the story. That's 100 miles each way, middle of winter, even though my 300 so odd miles of range car. That's where the math, you start to figure it out. Like, okay, I don't have a heat pump. I'm putting on resistive heat. It's 1-to-1. You get 1-to-1 ratio. You use so amount of energy from the battery pack to heat the interior. It's a 1-to-1 ratio of what's gone. You do a heat pump. Now you're extracting heat from the outside using an exchanger, and you're getting a roughly 3-to-1 ratio. You're more efficient, but it's still only putting a dent in the HVAC system portion of the whole picture, as well as it's more efficient at diverting heat from the motors as they warm up to go over to the battery pack to make them more efficient. But it's not a miracle, right? Like it moves it from 30 or 40% in the very worst winter scenario, like I just painted a picture of, down to maybe 25, 30%. Initially, bloggers are like, oh, it's going to be huge and the massive improvements. You own a Model 3 and now you have the Model Y. You're seeing a similar experience in your Model Y than your 2018 Model 3. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, it's not dramatic. You're always going to have an impact on range. I find the believe it or not, the heated steering wheel, which I guess is now going to become an option for the Y and the 3. The heated steering wheel, and of course the heating seats, if you can stay toasty, keeping those on and keeping the cabin temperature a little bit lower, that makes a big difference. And I know that some people are saying on the Model 3 you can just direct the vents at the wheel and it's almost like having a heated steering wheel. But I actually think that if you dress warmly, keep your coat on in the car and you have a heated steering wheel, you don't really need to spend as much energy. The car is pretty well insulated. It has, I think there's a thermal treatment for the glass, and this is true with buildings as well. If you just insulate things really well, you can reduce the heating requirement by 50%. And it may be too that the Model Y is just a better insulated car than the Model 3 was. And so I'm not as aware of range issues with the newer cars. And obviously you start out with more range too. So the Model Y has, I think, something like 320 miles of range, which is about what the Model S has. And of course, now the range gets bigger and bigger. The new Model S's have over 400 miles of range, right? So,
and then you've got competitors like Lucid Motors looking to get past 500. You got a new Model S, like you said, they're cranking up to 500, and then Roadster even 600. Crazy numbers, right? Those numbers are kind of hero numbers that most people won't see. But my story, it is true. I'm living in the center of Connecticut. I often drive to Boston and New York. I'm 2 hours from each. It's going to be pretty often I want to drive to those cities and get home without supercharging, to get home at dinner time rather than stopping on the way. And that it did make sense for me to go with the long range. It cost quite a bit more. It was a stretch at the time in 2018. Now the cost difference is pretty minimal. I want to, and the $7,000 rebate may be coming up soon too, right? So yeah.
Yeah. I guess they're dropping the price on the short range.
Yep. My wife has that.
Why?
Yep. She only drives a few miles to work every day. It's absolutely fine for her needs. And actually, let's see, the $7,000 I called a rebate. That was wrong. Tax credit. So I got to be careful there. That means you got to wait until spring or summer, your tax return, before you're seeing that money, if you make enough to be eligible. So you got to be careful there. By the way,
my husband too, right? So, I mean, we're still waiting for that to pass.
Yeah, that's going to have a detrimental impact on sales while the world waits on when is that going to pass, right? If you're shopping for a car right now, wow, if you're looking at a $38,000 Model 3, the standard range plus, and you're waiting for it to become maybe 31,000, you're willing to wait a few months to find out what the Biden administration is going to do with that $7,000 rebate. But yeah,
Yeah, if you can pick up the Connecticut cheaper rebate along the way, because I guess the price
1,500,
point
yeah.
will, yeah.
Yep. And actually, yeah, we alluded to the stuff that happening in Connecticut right now, so I'll just show my article briefly. This $1,500 rebate only came up a little bit at this permit to direct sales reviews in Connecticut, this article. But I actually do mention that a little bit, that for me, the $7,500 federal credit in 2018 that I got was huge. That helped make the thing possible, getting rid of our 12-year-old Honda Civic at that point. So we're pretty grateful. The timing worked out well for our family. This video, we touched on all kinds of things, but I'm just going to kind of close with a thought here. Like, see, this is the inside of your Pirelli building in New Haven. So we talked about insulation, heat pumps. They were all common, right? You as an architect. The car you're driving is the epitome of your day job, the incarnation of efficient envelopes of buildings put on 4 rubber patches of tires and driving around. Like, what a perfect car for you to be driving around in. Obviously, that kind of went through your mind, but it's also really comfortable and puts a smile on your face with the right. That's the part that's missing. Until people test drive it, they just don't understand, right? It just doesn't matter how much you and me talk until you sit in the car and test drive, whatever brand it is, right? So that's part of the cool part of it. But EV Club at Connecticut, it's not just Tesla, right? And that obviously this year in 2021, that's going to change. And let's cross our fingers here that Lucid, Rivian, and Tesla all giving testimony along with the public in the EV Club at Connecticut just 2 days ago. Hopefully makes the difference after many, many years of getting rejected and not actually passed into law to allow direct sales, which is clearly, the future here.
We have to get that. I mean, there are some really cool cars that are going to be sold through the dealers too. The Volvo XC 40, that's just, they're starting to deliver those, and that's a great car. And the VW ones are coming out, so I think they're the key is just to provide the freedom so that you can sell cars however it makes the most sense to the people making them, and give consumers the choice they need. And I'm really hopeful that that our legislature will finally embrace that. And Connecticut has a problem in that legislation too often has been sort of formulated in the interest of specific special interests. And this is a case where the car dealers have overplayed their hand and are trying to compromise the interest of the general public to promote their own private interests, which I'm just surprised politicians give them the time of day on that. Because if any other business went and said, grant me a monopoly or let me keep a monopoly, even though it's not in consumers' interest, we wouldn't, we shouldn't be given the time of day.
Yeah, no, good point. Yeah, I'll also add, I talked over you there. You were saying Volvo, and you were talking about Polestar. We've got VW ID4 now. We've got Mustang Mach-E coming to market. So this year is finally getting there, right? 2021, and even more exciting next year. And then, of course, Lucid and Rivian, both trying to deliver this year, soon, a quarter or two away.
I found it interesting. The testimony was a little contradictory from the dealers. I always have to sort of smile to hear their justifications.
Oh no, Bruce, you're going to make me have to turn comments off in this video now? Here we go. Trying to stay not political here, but it's tough not to.
Well, I don't think it's political. It's just science, and there's nothing. I think there was one of the car dealers was saying that that they found there was some discussion about online ordering for vehicles and how consumers actually seem to prefer that to be able to see everything online. And one of the car dealers said, yeah, well, we've learned from that, and we're now trying to provide more opportunity for customers to do their configuring online. And that that just the presence of Tesla in the market has helped sort of traditional retailers retool in a way that's helps meet consumer demand better. So it's important to let everyone come to the marketplace and participate. Competition is a good thing. it forces established retailers to sort of rethink and redirect their efforts to be more responsive to consumer desires. And I don't, I don't think it's a matter of politics to talk about enhancing consumer choice, because even within certain car companies, I think there's a recognition. What I think, and I also don't think it's necessarily a political thing to say that lobbyists should not be in charge of telling our elected officials what's in the public interest. I mean, it should be elected officials that figure that out for themselves without pressure from private interests.
Yeah, and well, I see your name all over the place when I was researching this article I wrote. So, in a good way, talking about, well, EV adoption in Connecticut, and you've been at it far longer than I, right? I've only had the car for 2 years. There's people in the club that have been driving around since 2012 in electrons, right? So, and I know you were the president of the EV Club of Connecticut for many years too. So I really appreciate what you've done. My closing thought here will be this: almost 40 years ago, I was on public transport taking a bus from Wethersfield to West Hartford to school, going right at the Gold Building, right next to this giant building. And it's just really, that's public transport. It took 40 minutes to get to school every day. Here I am 40 years later meeting you, the guy that revamped the building that I craned my neck looking up at every day. What better reuse of that giant empty building than someone like you coming along? It's just really inspiring. So thank you for having a chance to and taking the time to tell your story to me on a Sunday. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Paul. Thanks for what you're doing to get the word out about how Connecticut can find a more sustainable path forward. There's clearly a lot of work to do, but we've got some great opportunities, and half the problem is educating people about it. So you're doing the state of service by getting the word out to everyone about that. And I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce.